You're listening to Big Blend Radio's Lost Angel Travel Adventures show with Linda Ballou, travel writer and author, and your host, Lisa Smith. Welcome, everyone. You know, Linda Ballou loves to talk about her different adventures around the world and also the women that inspire her stories. And today, we're going to talk about 7 superwomen of the past that have influenced her life, her travels, her writing, and some of them are going to be familiar to you because they're part of her books. And we've also talked about some of them on the podcast. But she grouped these 7 women together, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I can't wait to dig in. She's written an article about them all. You can see the link in the episode notes. It's also go to blendradioandtv.com. But it is Women's History Month, but I think every day is a Women's Day. So that's what I have to say. Welcome, Linda. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Lisa, and looking forward to talking about my women who have inspired me.
I want to ask you this before you get into these 7 women, but we all are raised in different ways with different belief systems and everything. And you had an interesting life for sure, living in different places in Alaska, getting, kicked onto a plane to go to Southern California for, having a boyfriend that you shouldn't when you were an early teen. Well, maybe you should have, I don't know, but you didn't make all those decisions. So a lot of, growing up sometimes is the world of books, the movies. Maybe you go to a park and see something about a woman, but you try to grasp onto what you can for other younger women or, and for me, it was that way too. We didn't have Google growing up. Our younger generation now has the world at their fingertips, literally. But put your phone down when you're taking a walk. I just want to say that you're going to walk into a lamppost, and I watch you all do it, and I think it's funny. But when you read books or and things like that, women helped you be kind of like number one. Go, oh, It's not just me. It's not just me thinking this and feeling this, or hey, I can do this. The inspiration. What is it for you with certain women that you go, oh yeah, that helps as a younger woman looking when you think about your childhood to
Okay,
now?
so when I was 13, I was rudely uprooted, which I've said before because it's
You
true.
crack me up every
I
time you
know,
said
and
that.
I lived in California and I was in the accelerated class, and I was taken to Haines, Alaska, a little tiny town of 2,000. And there was only 60 kids in the entire school. So I was very isolated there. There was a lot of wonderful things about Haines, Alaska, but I was a little bit of a fish out of water. So I turned to books, and at the age of 13 or 14, and I don't know how this happened, I got a copy of The Second Sex, which is written by a French woman, Simone de Beauvoir. And she was a groundbreaking, her book, The Second Sex, was groundbreaking work for feminists. And it had all sorts of, outlandish ideas about women and their position in society, and how they weren't the second sex, they were equal with men, and she talked
Oh,
about marriage and about how women lose themselves and their identity in marriage if they're not careful and if they're not aware, and so on. So she filled me with all sorts of really uh, alien points of view from my own upbringing, from my own mother, who actually I gave her the chapter. I asked her to read the chapter on marriage, and she literally slammed the book closed because
oh,
it was so. It didn't support who she was, in her
mm,
time. Her marriage was the most important thing, and her family, of course. And she, did take a second position with my father. So
mhm.
anyway, um, I was at a very early age becoming different from my peers because I was thinking in a much more
Mhm.
modern, progressive way than my peers. And I didn't realize this, at the time. I just, thought it started me thinking though, and it really influenced me. in tremendous ways. Now, when I came to California, I was 18. I left Haines, Alaska, and I came to California and went to college down here. I was outside of my peer group. I didn't think like they did, you
Mm,
know. And so once again, they were burning their bras. At that time, it was in the 60s, women
mm,
were burning their bras in the street. But I wasn't vocal or protesting or anything, but I was definitely questioning the role of women in society and what I wanted to do with my life. Did I
mm.
want to get married? Did I want to have children? And other girls were not thinking, do I want to get married and have children? They were still thinking, yes, I want a man and I want to be supported
Yeah.
and I want to, be a stay at home mom and things like that. And even though they were burning their bra, they weren't, they had to figure out
They
how to
hadn't
make
taken
a
the full
living,
step.
how to make a living to make this change.
Yeah.
And another, Maya Angelou, she is another brilliant woman that we're not talking about today necessarily, but she said, every woman should have their own purse because, and so I
Yes.
went for financial independence. And I determined, yeah, I want to have my own money so I can make my own decisions in life. I didn't necessarily reject having a relationship with a man, but definitely questioning how I was going to be involved in that
Mm.
role in that relationship.
Yeah, it's
So,
also interesting for those now, like getting married, how women are keeping their second name, their maiden name.
yeah,
We're seeing a lot of that kind of change now. And I was, raised to with a mom who was, yes, burning her bra, but also did the marriage and went, oh, I'm out. And for good reason, and went halfway around the world when the divorce. As soon as that ink dried, she was like, "I'm out. I'm going to Africa," and took me. And yet, there, all the women were very in marriage, definitely. And this is the 80s, late 70s into the 80s, the same way. But it was very interesting because I was raised with a conservation, everything was about wildlife conservation, nature, the environment, the ecosystems, and I could see what was happening with population, having lived in the boonies of Africa and lived to see poverty, true poverty that scares people. Some people get off a plane in India or Africa and get back on the plane freaked out and horrified. And it is sad that we have so many people without food, water, etc. And my mind was zero population. I heard this when I was a teen somewhere, got that pamphlet, and I'm like, this is, it was like the book, my bookmark on every book. And I read as much as I could about women. And that's why I was asking you how books can shape you, because you could have all these external influences, going to school, going to college, and going into the workforce. Yet when you go home and you have your book on your own, it's like, yeah, I can manifest my destiny.
right. Well, so I'd like to. So I went on,
Yeah.
and I went into the business world, and I put myself through college selling real estate, and I was, working very hard to be independent, and I was grappling with, what I was going to do with my life. So I dropped out of society for 1 year to think about it because I had a degree in English literature at that point, and I knew I could make a living in real estate. And I wanted to know if I was a writer, if I had the goods, if I needed to test myself and to think about this, and get to decide, what I was going to do with my life. So I landed on the North Shore of Kauai. Very nice place to sit down on the beach and think about what you're going to do with your life. But while I was there, and I have to say it was probably the most blissful year of my life because my biggest decision was which beach I was going to go to and which book I was going to read. And while I was there, I took a job at the Garden Isle as a cub reporter, running around the island interviewing people, which was fun. And Captain Cook, it was the bicentennial year of the landing of Captain Cook in the islands. And that got me getting into the Hawaiian history. And there I met this person, this woman, Ka'ahumanu, who was a childless bride, who was the favorite wife of Kamehameha the Great, who had 32 wives, so that was no small accomplishment. But through the strength of her intelligence, she was his companion. And they were together, all their adult lives. She was a partner with him in his rise to power. And I just thought, wow, here is a woman in history and she became the most powerful woman in old Hawaii. And in fact, she ended up being responsible for the ending of the 2,000-year-old Kapu system, which was very brutal, called for human sacrifice. Many, women could only eat certain foods, separation of houses, sleeping houses for men and women, all sorts of rules against women. They couldn't eat red bananas and pork and a few other things. So she rebelled against all of this. She rebelled against her society. And she stood up to the priests who were death dealing and, beat people to death. This was a rough
Oh.
society. We think of Hawaii as aloha spirit. Well, there was a little more to it than that. So in the end, she, turned that system on its heels and was responsible for the burning of the gods and changing
Mm.
the entire culture. And so I was very impressed with this person. And she wasn't important in history because she was the mother of somebody. She was
Mm.
important in history because she changed it,
Yeah.
you know?
And it
And
was
and
for
I
many,
and
many
also
people.
and also she was super athletic. She swam miles a day. She was, over 6 feet tall. She was statuesque. She wasn't what you would call a great beauty, but she had a charisma, and she was dubbed the loving mother of the people. And some people consider her a traitor to her times because she did change the world, but
Mm.
others, view her as a heroine who made their
Mm.
world a softer
Better.
place to live in, if not better, at least not quite as
Well,
cruel.
sometimes people that don't have children, women who don't have children, go on to foster many children through different ways.
Right.
And that's one with her. Now, Simone writing her book, do you think she looked at women like Kamehameha, and went, hey, did I even say her name right? I didn't, did I? No, I didn't.
Kahakamanu, that's okay.
I
It's
got Kamehameha twirled
let's
around.
just say Wai-Nani, because
Wai-Nani,
in
because
my
that's who
book,
you
it's
wrote about.
Wai-Nani, because it's a lot
Okay.
easier to say. All the names are changed because it's hard for Westerners because there's too many K words in the Hawaiian language.
Yeah. But
So
do you think
Simone
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 would be
had
in?
a
Yeah.
50-year affair with Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a philosopher of the time. I think her book was published in 1947. And she was a rebel in her day. And like I said, she was a feminist, but at that moment in time, that wasn't a popular thing to be. And they never married. And I don't believe she had any children. I'm pretty sure no children. I think he left her in the end and had a child with a younger woman, but hey, they
Isn't
were
that
very
typical?
liberal. They had three ways, and they had an open marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
They were French.
Yeah, that's because, well, because and we are moving towards that kind of society, and people are like, does it work, doesn't? It's like arranged marriages are, oh, very much of the past, depending on your culture. And then some
Right.
cultures,
No,
they'll sit there and say they make him work. Some of it is positive, some of it's not.
I know an Indian man who lived here and had a job here, a good one, and he had an arranged marriage, and the family sent over the woman, and he married her sight unseen. So
Well, they sit down and make an agreement. They're like, all right, we
yeah,
better stick this out. We might as well
right.
do what makes us
It's
happy.
a
So I
different
kind of think
culture,
it's
but
interesting.
I'm glad I'm living in the time that I am, because women have more freedom now than they've ever had and more opportunity. Even though we're having some trouble with the
Yes,
laws right now, but I think women mentally have changed so dramatically that
we
even
can wear pants. Let's just go there. We
yeah,
we weren't allowed to wear pants.
yeah, that's
Now,
right. So
Isabella Bird rode horses
right, I
without
was
being
just gonna
side saddle. I
yeah,
want to go to her.
let's talk about Isabella, because she in 1873, uh, a Victorian age woman, wore straight lace and stays, very stiff and proper, and rode side saddle and she was an invalid until the age of 40. I won't go into the whole thing, but she was an incredible woman who lifted herself up from the invalid's bed and became the best loved travel writer of her day. She went to Hawaii and she wanted to see uh, the volcano, the brimstone and fire that her evangelical father had talked about in his sermons, and the living earth,
Ooh.
the earth birthing, as it were. So she had to ride up the flank of the volcano. Well, in order to do that, she had to ride astride. And she learned that sitting upright on the saddle aligned her spine, and she was free of this terrible chronic back pain that she'd had all her life. So then she went on to become a very wild thing, when she had a body and now she could live fully. She galloped wildly all over the Hawaiian Islands, through gulches and rainforests, and slept with the natives in their, very common abodes, but was also honored by the Hawaiian alihi, and she was stayed down in the Valley of the Gods and was treated as an honored guest. And, she just did fabulous things. And she broke through all sorts of social barriers. She used to wear these crazy riding habits, Turkish bloomers, you know, bloomer
Yeah.
pants. But then she went to Colorado and she had Birdie. Then she had a mare. She met her horse that became her really best friend, Birdie, and she rode Birdie 800 miles through the Front Range of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. I mean, what a woman! I mean, really. And she said things like, "If you want to be a vine around a tree, then marry." She had no inclination to marry.
I love that.
She
I
wanted,
love that. The
yeah, I do
vine
too.
around the tree
You want to
married.
be a vine around a tree, exactly. If you want to turn your independence and your autonomy over to
Hmm.
someone else and live off of their accomplishments
Hmm.
and be in their shadow, marry. So there's a lot of nice things about marriage between two equals, but I think in her day particularly it was
Hmm.
not an equal situation. Her father totally dominated her mother, totally. The mother, totally lived in the shadow of her evangelical father. So anyway, she breaks loose of all of that. Also, she in her day there were female writers, but they used pen names. They didn't have they couldn't write with a feminine name, but she did. uh, she wrote in a journal fashion diaries that she sent back to England to her sister Henrietta, who edited them. And then she had a lifelong publisher who just published. She would romp around the world, go all around the world, and send her
Wow.
diaries back. She published many, many books in her name, and she was the first woman abducted into the Scottish National Geographic Society, and she used to give talks there.
Wow.
So my book is takes her from Hawaii, where she has this transformative experience, to Colorado, where she has a love affair with Mountain Jim, who helps her in climbing Long's Peak, which is just incredible. He
Well, it was
practically,
massive.
he doesn't want to take her. He says to her, you're too scrawny. I don't want to be up there with you. What if I get hurt? Are you going to take me back? No, am I going to have to carry you out? No, I don't want to. Well, she prevailed upon him 2 or 3 times. Finally, he agrees to take her, and he literally has to put her on his shoulders to get her to the top. And they have a beautiful relationship, uh,
Mm.
and that I think is a very special part of her story and my book.
And it shows the freedom of being able to have your own separate lives and have something together. You know what I
Right.
mean? And let it have that freedom. Now I know you're going to go to Georgie. Right.
Yeah.
But now before you get there, I want to go back to Hawaii
Oh,
where Isabella was. Okay. Because Georgie is incredible about water. Okay. Now you talked about Wai-Nani, who is incredible about water and can really swim, but you left out Bobo on this list. I
I
just
only had so much time here, but we will talk about Bobo if you like. I
just
mean,
give her a shout
she
out
is
because
my
by the
most.
way, so many people have listened to this episode. It's one of the top episodes is
Oh, really?
Bobo.
Okay, well, good to
Yes.
know, good to know.
She's
Well,
got a cult
she's
following.
still with us, you see.
Yeah.
Bobo is not in history. Bobo is still
Yeah.
alive. And when I lived on the North Shore of Kauai, she was a legend in her own time then, because she would swim the Nepali coast uh, with just a belt around her waist with a little bottle with, she'd have a marijuana joint.
That's how she
And
got that lung power for the water.
but her swims were her way of dealing with the cold wind that blew through her heart.
Oh,
She was divorced. She was raising her kids on her own. And so in because of that, or she was living at the effect of a lot of sadness, and she became an alcoholic. Okay.
mm,
And she would go on 3-day rampages on the island. She was notorious for that, but she would sober up by taking these, you know, I think like 14-mile swims down the Nepali coast to
wow.
Kalalau and spend the night there by herself in the swim on. And she had relationships with dolphins swimming along with her. And it was her, and she would come clean that way and deal with some very sad things in her life, you
Mm.
know. So there is a documentary about her on YouTube if you have more interest in her. And of course,
I'm
there's
going to
my
link in the
podcast
episode
about
notes.
her, you
I'll
know.
link it in the episode notes because you have
Yeah,
the link to the documentary too.
she's a very memorable person, and she's one of my most unforgettable characters for sure. And
Well,
her
and but it shows that because perfection is um it's overrated. It's because it when you realize things aren't perfect and you need to fix whatever's going on, that's when you push yourself to these places that you didn't even think you could do.
That's true.
Look at Isabella Bird, the pain that she went through.
Right.
Look at all of this. These are all
Well,
women that went past
let me just say
limitations.
this about Izzy and we'll move on. Some people read her book in Colorado, particularly, and even the Hawaii book too.
Mm,
And they say, oh, she's exaggerating. She couldn't do all of that stuff. But you know what? She had a higher threshold for pain. I believe she did ride 800 miles through the Rockies, and I do believe her little feet were frozen to the,
mm-hmm,
to the saddle bar, the stirrup, and that she slept with, the people, the settlers, and slept on the floor. And I believe
mm-hmm.
she herded feral cattle. I mean, I believe her. I think she was unafraid and had a much higher tolerance for pain than the average person, because
Mm-hmm.
for the first 40 years of her life, I mean, they did surgery on her without anesthesia. That'll toughen you up.
Yeah, look at Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo, the
Look
same
at
thing.
Frida Kahlo. There's another one, but we're not going to go there. We don't have
I know.
time.
I know this is good. We'll go crazy, but that she had a tolerance for, and well, she drank a lot of tequila too.
She
But
was
she
no
channeled
angel.
her pain. She channeled her pain through her art too.
Right,
You
right.
have to find a way to manage it, and
The
sometimes
deal.
that is the ultimate beauty. And you let people know that you persevere through whatever your challenge is.
Well,
You persevere.
frankly, I've been writing for my life, all my
Yep,
life. And my writing has been my way of dealing with challenges that have come to me.
yeah,
So yeah. So let's think.
Georgie.
Georgie White. Okay, I love Georgie. I love
I do
Georgie.
too.
I really, for a couple of reasons. One, because she was from Los Angeles and I live in Los Angeles, and she was on the Pacific, and she sold real estate here, and I sell real estate
I
here.
didn't know she sold real
Yeah,
estate.
she
Oh,
sold real estate in LA, and she was bicycling on the Pacific Coast Highway, which I often
mm,
am on. and hit and run driver hit her daughter, her 15-year-old daughter, and killed her on the spot at Point Magoo right here.
Oh,
So Georgie, spiraled out of society. She could not deal with this. Was just She was in such shape that she had to leave, and the place where she landed to deal with her situation, her grief and sorrow, was the Grand Canyon.
mm,
So she, for 2 years or so, hiked the walls of the Grand Canyon by herself and with her friend. Once in a while, she made friends with this man, Henry Ailes, I think his name was. And she would live on like a tin of stewed tomatoes or something. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like John Muir, he would be in the mountains on a cup of tea and a toast forever. I mean,
yeah.
it's unbelievable that the human body can actually function so well on so little. So anyway, she did this for a couple of years, and then she finally decided to take a swim. She jumped into the Colorado River. This is before it was dammed. So the volume was much larger, the current was much faster, and it's plenty big and
Yeah.
fast now. However, it's much colder because it's coming from the
Mm.
dam water. So it was warm when she swam, and she swam the Colorado River. And I mean, oh my God, when I think about it, I mean, because there's big rapids on that river
And
and
snakes.
tremendous currents. I mean, just amazing. Okay, so she swam the river, and then she's called the wildcat of the river. She started rafting the river. She went, oh, okay, I think I'll get into a raft and I'll raft the river by myself. And she did. And then she decided she loved the river so much, and she found so much peace in nature, and she wanted to share the mystical beauty of the canyon, which it is magical, being in the Grand Canyon,
Mm.
and the bottom in the water, in the river, on the river. I've rafted the river. So she took two Army surplus rafts, tied them together, and called it a G rig, went back to LA, told everybody how wonderful, and built up tourism for the canyon. And these G rigs, the tourists get in, and these rigs were enough to handle the rapids, and she
Mm.
could take the tourists down the river in the G rig. So she was solely responsible for, and she just was a wildcat too. Then she made friends. Then people came, and she was into camping out in the river and having fun with the other guides. But she was the one who really started the whole tourism thing in the Grand Canyon.
Wow. That's amazing. You got to think about that. I mean, and also again, looking at a woman going off and doing the
Right,
man side of things. And
right.
so our next lady is a lady that's dear to a place I grew up in Kenya. Tell us
Ah,
about Beryl. Yeah,
yeah,
because
yeah. Well,
she's flying instead of rafting and swimming.
yeah, Burl Markham. I love Burl Markham, and she lived in a time that I mean, a place. The time was the colonist time in Africa, in East Africa, and it was a world that was changing very, very fastly. But when she was a little girl, she ran and hunted with the Maasai, and she you know was a little wild thing. That's what she was. A little wild thing. And she grew up into an incredibly beautiful wild thing. And she was really independent. Her father raised thoroughbred horses, and so she was an incredible horsewoman. But she didn't ride for competition herself, but she became a trainer, a horse trainer in
Mm,
Kenyan. And that was her first big love and accomplishment. And then she went on to be the first bush pilot in Kenya. And she would scout for the rich British men who would come down for big game hunts. And even though she wasn't really into trophy hunting, she needed to make a living. and so she would scout. And I just dream of her flying over the Serengeti with all these vast, herds of animals, the zebras and the, all of the wildebeest, all of it, and it was, there's a documentary that I just found that I just love. It's called A World Without Walls. And it was filmed in 1985 when she was still alive.
Wow.
Yeah, she died in 1986. And so there's pictures of her there as an older person, but also of her as a young person. And she went on to fly to be the first woman, I think, person, not just woman, person, to fly in the headwinds to the Americas from London to
Mm.
New World, the Americas. It was 1947 or something like that. Anyway, she was just an incredibly bold and brave person. She was very independent, and apparently, she was quite. Men were drawn to her like moth to a flame, and then they would try to tame her. You know how
Mm.
people are
Yes.
attracted to the wildness of and the independence and the beauty. She was really
Mm.
quite stunning, even in her older years. So she had 3 marriages that didn't work, because, I mean, I don't know the details because she doesn't talk about it in her book. West Into the Night is her book, which I'm reading again now. I wrote it 10 years ago. I'm reading it. I'm loving it so much more now that I've
Oh,
seen
wow.
it. Yeah, because I've seen the documentary. Also, I'm a better writer and a better reader. I mean, I appreciate her,
Yeah.
the beauty of her work. Some people say that accuse her of not writing it because they say she wasn't educated. That's not true. She
Uh-huh.
was educated, even though she was,
Well,
didn't
when
go
they
to
see
didn't
some,
like going to school. She did know how to read and write, and she certainly knew how to capture
they
this
had
world,
tutors.
this
Yeah.
world at that time, that
Mm.
that period when the whole world was changing there, and the colonists were being driven out, and there were wars and turmoil. So anyway, she left Africa for 20 years, and then when she came back, she became a horse trainer again. And she did have a child in the third marriage. And they took the child away from her, saying that she was an unfit mother, which I think is very cruel. They wouldn't let her
Mm.
have, be with they took the child back to England. The father was a wealthy
Ooh.
nobleman.
Yeah. There you
So
go.
there was a case, where I think that was a very cruel outcome for her not to be able to,
Yeah.
be with her child. I mean, maybe, you know, the child could have gone back and forth, but no, no, they
Mm.
they they divorced the child from her. So anyway, Burl Markham, yes, an
Mm.
incredible woman and
Wow.
beautiful book.
Wow. I want to read that because, especially growing up there. So she had to been in her elder years when
She
we
was
were there.
86 when she died.
Yeah. So
And
she would have
for
been in her
her,
80s.
for her, what was the worst thing that could happen was boredom.
God, I know. I don't
She had to
understand.
have
I
action,
I
She
don't
did.
understand boredom. When people go, I'm bored, I'm like, I have too much to do. I don't
Right.
understand boredom or just
Yeah.
just lying on the couch. I've had that out of exhaustion, but not
Right.
out of let me just
Right.
I don't get it. So I love these stories, because it just shows women who just kept going for it. Now, our next lady was a lady of the northern desert, the high desert of New
Oh.
Mexico,
Oh, yeah,
Georgia, art,
Georgia.
because wow, I think she, people go to Santa Fe and they see her art and they pigeonhole her art, and it always annoys me because she's more than flowers. She's done
Oh, way
cityscape.
more,
She's from New York, and I
way
mean,
more.
this pigeonholing needs to.
Right. So Georgia O'Keeffe, I admired her tremendously, so much so that I went to Santa Fe specifically to go to her home and to go to the Ghost Ranch. So her story is that she was married to Stieglitz in New York. In New York, he was a very, very famous photographer, and he really lifted her from obscurity. This is true. He built her, career, so to speak. But he did a lot of photographs about her, and one of them was her nude, and not real evocative poses, kind of artsy poses,
Mm-hmm.
but it gave her, when she did paint her very famous flowers, which are very sensual, very rich, and just pull you in. Um, People said, "Oh, she's being trying to be erotic," and that wasn't the case at all.
Hmm.
It's just that flowers are erotic. Flowers are
Yeah.
designed to be erotic.
Look at
Nature
orchids.
has designed flowers to attract pollinators,
Mm-hmm.
and so yes, flowers do draw us in. Flowers are
And what's
sensual.
wrong with the erotic and
And what's
sensualism?
wrong with it anyway? Right.
Come
So
on, nature wants that's nature.
yeah, right,
Mother Nature wants you
right.
to procreate.
So
Did
that
I say the right word? I'm behaving, Linda.
procreate, yeah. Yes, that's right. So she had to leave Stieglitz because he was too confining, and he had a big family, and they'd have to go to the family in New York, and she couldn't stand being around all these people. And so he built her a studio there so she could go lock herself in and paint and be away from all these people. But she wasn't happy. She wasn't happy with that life. And so she left New York and notoriety. She had a career there, and went to New Mexico, northern New Mexico, to a place called the Ghost Ranch.
Mm,
And the Ghost Ranch is where she painted many of her landscapes, New Mexico landscapes that are also very famous and in galleries around the world. But there she lived a very rough life, very isolated, didn't have facilities. And she would walk for hours or she would ride for hours in the mountains and so on. And she learned to drive. Being from New York, she didn't know how to drive. She learned how to drive in a week because she had to drive to Albuquerque or to Santa Fe, which was 60 miles away, to get her supplies. And in those days, it was a bit of a schlep. The
mm-hmm.
highways weren't what they are today. So she lived out there for years, and then eventually, and she lived in solitude. I mean, yeah, there were some people, but basically very isolated,
Mm-hmm.
and then and self-sufficient.
Mm,
And she then but she was still quite a famous artist, and she sold a lot of art, and she had the money to buy a house, and she did, in Abiquiu, and that was about 13 miles south of the Ghost Ranch. So they have tours of her home, and I went on the tour in her home. And it was a hacienda that was in very ill repair, and she spent a ton of dough turning it into a mid-century modern place.
mm,
And with Eames chairs and very modern decor, and very zen like, because she went to Japan and she liked Japan and she liked the zen feel. And so her home was really cool. And
mm.
still she still lived pretty much in isolation there. Abiquiu is like, I don't know, 300 people or something. Anyway,
Yeah.
Gloria Steinem came to her door to interview her and set her up as an example of feminism, successful feminist. And George O'Keeffe would not receive her.
Wow.
She did not want to be labeled as a feminist. She
Mm,
wasn't fighting the way for other women. She was simply being
being.
herself. So my goal in life has been, what I decided my goal in life is, remember when I was thinking about it,
Mm,
was self-actualization. Just to be
mm.
yourself to the hilt, okay? I'm not a
I love that.
feminist. I'm for men and women evolving and becoming who they are and really, want to be, and living up to their potential, kind of thing. And George O'Keeffe certainly did that.
Yeah,
And
without controlling each other.
yeah, and she
And
had
yeah.
she even though she was very private and didn't receive people at her home, she in fact got dogs in her yard to make certain people wouldn't hop the walls, which they
Go
did.
girl. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and she raised all her own vegetables and stuff. But she had friends who stayed with her an extent, like Ansel Adams stayed with her for
Mhm.
extended periods of time. She had friends with other artists,
Mhm.
and she had a very cool life. And I
That's
really respected her in many many ways.
I think that happens a lot with artists and writers, comedians for sure. Comedians don't really want to talk to anybody who's not a comedian unless they're doing their stand up and dealing with the audience stuff
Uh,
and on it.
well,
But they don't, because people don't like, even with what we do with podcasts, right? Interviewing authors, they feel much better if they know you write. Musicians feel much better if they know that I've got this music background. Then they're like, oh, I can talk to you now.
well,
You're one of us.
she
You
had good
know,
friends with other artists, but she was not a snob, and she went into the little
it's
town of
not a snob thing.
Right.
It's
She was in
a
the little town
comfort.
of Abiquiu, and people. She was very kind and gentle with the people there, and was
Mm-hmm.
generous with the people, and so she wasn't a snob. She just didn't want celebrity. She wasn't
Yeah,
into that, and
that's nice.
and so she
I
didn't.
wonder what she would think now, how it is, like how, because there's even now they're saying, oh, this is Georgia O'Keeffe country, and the local Native Americans are going, excuse me, um, so,
Well,
and
I think it would just roll off her back.
I know
She wasn't into
the,
engaging in societal issues.
yeah, yeah, I think just do your thing. I love that part. Now, your final lady, see, all of them in some way have connected, some connection to travel in the arts that you the ladies you've talked about. The next one, certainly your final one that you want to talk about, I know we'll find another one to talk about, but is really did some travel and didn't think that was going to be her life. But I mean, the Lewis and Clark expedition would
Oh,
never have happened.
yeah,
You think about Georgie White,
yeah. I said,
Sacagawea, like
yeah, in that
that's
piece,
it.
I said, let us not forget Sacagawea. Let
Oh,
us not forget
and we
her.
want to say Sacagawea all the time anyway.
Yeah,
It's just
well, they
such a good
also
thing.
called her Bird Woman. So
Yeah.
I loved Sacagawea. Yeah, I rafted the Salmon River, which begins
Yeah.
in Limhi, Idaho, which is where the Baolith Mountains begin, this incredibly vast mountain range that when the Lewis and Clark expedition got to that point, they looked out over that and they went, wow, how are we going to go across this? It was just so Sacagawea, when she was a little girl, and she was a Shoshone, was stolen by the Mandan tribe, and she was pretty much a slave there in that tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And when she was like older, I don't know exactly how old, but let's say 20,
Mm-hmm.
a fur trader came down the river, and he won Sacagawea in a game of cards. Ah, and he got picked up by the expedition as a guide. So Sacagawea now is on, in the expedition, and she's got a baby on her back, you know, and she saves many of the men on the expedition with her knowledge of the medicinal plants and so on, and is a very, very important part of the expedition. But when they get to the Baolith and they look across and they go and they know that they are stopped here, she goes to the Shoshone tribe and reconnects with her brother, who is the chief now of that tribe, and convinces him that the white men are good people and that he should give them a guide over the mountains. And he does. And without that, they would still be standing there,
Wow.
scratching their head trying to figure out how to get to the
Yeah.
coast.
Amazing, isn't it?
So they have in Lemhi, and they have a statue to her, and they have a museum and things. And I was very impressed with her story.
Mm,
You know,
for sure.
just her strength,
And she
and
had to go to different
and
tribes.
no
That was the other
bitterness,
thing.
no bitterness in
Yeah.
Sacagawea. She was giving all of herself all the time to
Mm,
these people who had to, she wasn't a slave exactly, but she was a servant to them.
mm.
But she
But
saved them. She saved them.
she had to
So
go into different tribes, and that wasn't always a positive thing, for her
no,
to
no,
just,
she was
yeah.
stolen. Like I said, she was pretty much a
Hmm.
slave in the Mandan tribe. So
Hmm.
the Indian people, they had slaves. They stole
Hmm.
they stole people from one another. I mean, they weren't all angels, you know.
That happened in Africa with different tribes too.
Right,
But she wasn't always welcome in another tribe just because they're Indian, and that's
right.
something that everyone forgets. It's like, oh, she's Indian, just send her in. Oh, and she's a female. Like, the men, are they going to listen to a woman? Maybe the women to women, but there's so many different dynamics of things that she went through, and
Mhm.
she guided. And so it was like, I think everybody on that expedition knew, like, you ain't got anything without her. She is the key of that expedition, no matter what,
Their
so
success, yes.
yeah, for sure. I love your seven super women. They are super women. They're awesome. So I do want to say this. Go to lindaballooauthor.com and go get some of her books and start reading them, because they all have super women in them, and you're going to find yourself in there somewhere, and other women that you identify with and can learn from and be inspired from. So go check it out, lindaballooauthor.com. And of course, lostangeladventures.com. We always talk about your Lost Angel travel adventures. So this was such a good segment. Linda, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. It's always great to talk with you.
I feel like I could go run the block, but that's not true. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Lost Angel Travel Adventure Show with Linda Ballou, travel writer and author. Keep up with her at lindaballooauthor.com and lostangeladventures.com. You can also keep up with Big Blend Radio at bigblendradio.com. Now, happy traveling.